Fellowship Farm. Book 8, Ayyám-i-Há. It is time for Ayyám-i-Há at Fellowship Farm. The children look forward to serving and teaching, as well as treats and presents. Invitations, treasure hunts, super glider slip and sliders and more fill the days of Ha for the Fitzgeralds. Bullies try to spoil it for Sky Marie. Can she turn the crisis into victory? Chapter 1, First Day of Ayyám-i-Há. When Lisa, Sky Marie and Alinga Fitzgerald left their house that morning, running late for the first day of the new school year, their backpacks were heavy with new books, papers, pens and pencils. Now, as they grabbed their backpacks and headed outside to wait for the school bus, their bags were light and almost empty. None of the teachers were so mean as to give homework on the very first day. As they waited under the big old oak trees at the front of the school, they chatted and played with their friends. There were 2 new girls in Lisa's grade 6 class, but no one new had joined Sky in grade 4 or Alinga in grade 2. Alinga's fine brown hair hung down to his shoulders in a knotty mess. He pushed it out of his dark brown eyes with grubby fingers so he could see inside his bag. He pulled out his drink bottle and took a long swig. He offered it to his sister, who was perched on a wall at the base of one of the trees. Sky was thirsty too. At lunchtime, she had played soccer with her friends right up to the second bell and had not had a chance to have a proper drink. Sky's strong, tall frame, broad shoulders and full head of frizzy brown hair made her appear much more than 18 months older than her slender younger brother. Sometimes she was mistaken for the eldest of the 3, as her older sister was also slightly built. But her constantly grazed knees and elbows gave clues about her youthfulness and about her proneness to accidents. Passing the bottle back to Alinga and pushing herself down from the wall, Sky moved around the tree to where Lisa was standing with her back to the parking lot. Sky reached out and gently tugged one of Lisa's long dark plaits. "Sister, Miss Rowbottom's opened the bus door." Lisa glanced to the bus, picked up her backpack and hitched it over one shoulder. "Gotta go," she smiled to her new friend. "See you tomorrow." Lisa turned to follow her sister and brother over to the bus. Soon the bus was full of the Kellyton Primary School children who lived on the farms between Kellyton and Choppy's Point. Miss Rowbottom yelled for quiet and then slowly pulled out of the school grounds. As they passed the vet, Alinga, Sky and Lisa looked to see if their mother was out the front. Romy Fitzgerald worked as the Kellyton small animal vet, treating people's cats, dogs and other pets. Sometimes people also brought in injured wild animals like possums and wombats. And when the Kellyton big animal vet was away, Romy also visited farms and helped sick cows, sheep, pigs and horses. If she was between clients at 3:15, she usually came out of the surgery to wave. But today she wasn't on the veranda as the bus drove past. Having passed through the township, the old school bus turned right and roared along the dirt road towards the point. Each time it stopped at a farm to let children off, dust from the road came swirling in the windows, getting in eyes, noses, ears and mouths. But it was way too hot to keep the windows shut. Fellowship Farm was the very last farm on the road out to the point. The children climbed out of the now empty bus and waved goodbye to Ms. Rowbottom. They walked slowly through the blue gate of the farm and then through the smaller white gate in front of the farmhouse. Leaves crackled as lizards scampered for safety into the dry, overgrown garden on either side of the path. As they reached the back of the house, 3 fat puppies came scampering across the lawn. They had fully recovered from their unexpected ride down the river the day before and were thrilled to see the children home. The children hung their bags in the boot room and slipped off their blue leather school shoes and white socks. They ran back down the veranda steps to have a quick play with their puppies. Their father Flip appeared on the veranda from inside the kitchen.
"How was your first day back?"
he asked. As usual, Flip had come in from the farm to greet the children and prepare their afternoon snack. "Good," giggled Alinga as he lay on his back receiving slobbery kisses all over his face from Flea. "I've got 2 new girls in my class," said Lisa, walking up the steps to the veranda with Fizz nipping at her heels, begging her to play some more. Lisa gave her dad a hug. "Guess what?" said Sky, following her sister up the steps. "Laurie went on a cruise ship on her holiday. It sounds amazing! Can we go on a cruise ship, Daddy?" asked Sky.
"Definitely," said Flip. "Absolutely, certainly."
Sky's eyes widened.
"Just as soon as you 3 get full-time jobs," he added.
"Dad!" The children washed their hands and sat up at the table to eat their snack. There were fresh blackberries that the family had picked the day before with cream on top, and some oatmeal cookies that they had taken on their picnic the day before but had not had time to eat. Flip left the children to eat and went back out to the farm to continue working until dark. Flip had moved the cows over to the paddocks by the river, just north of the hay paddocks, so there was plenty of grass and no need for the children to feed them hay. The children changed out of their school uniforms and attended to their afternoon chores. Then they hurried back to the farmhouse to enjoy a wonderful hour with their puppies. Around 5:30, Romy arrived home from the surgery. The children helped their mother prepare dinner. They were having tacos. Romy cooked the mince and spices. Lisa grated the cheese and the carrots. Sky chopped the lettuce and the tomato. Alinga set the table and poured some homemade blackcurrant juice syrup into one of the jugs of cold water in the fridge, then lifted the heavy jug into the middle of the table. Just as the bell on the little toaster went bing to let them know that they could take the warm taco shells out, Flip arrived in from the farm. He washed his face and hands at the outside toilet and took off his filthy overalls and shirt in the laundry before coming into the kitchen in his boxer shorts.
"I don't know why all the cows kept covering their eyes today," he said, kissing Romy as he walked through the kitchen to put some clean clothes on.
"Because you're Rudy-Nudie!" laughed Alinga. While they waited for Flip to dress, Romy said, "Thank you for your helpfulness and unity while we made dinner. You can all put 2 stickers on the virtues chart." The children chose their stickers. As Sky stuck her helpfulness sticker onto the chart, the very last piece of card was covered. "The virtues chart is full of stickers!" declared Sky.
"So that's why our home is full of virtue,"
said Flip, coming back into the kitchen for dinner. "Congratulations!" Chapter 2, Consultation. The first week of school was fun and busy. The days passed quickly, and as each day passed, the children marked it off on the calendar in the kitchen. They were counting down to Ayyám-i-Há. It was a period that the children looked forward to every year. Every year, their parents prepared a treasure hunt for each of the 4 days. At the end of each treasure hunt was a clue, and at the end of the 4 days, the children had to put the clues together to find out where their Ayyám-i-Há gift was. "What are we getting for Ayyám-i-Há, Mum?" asked Sky as Wednesday the 26th of February drew near. "Frog's ears and snake's legs dipped in chocolate," said Romy. "How about you think about what special service you're going to do for Ayyám-i-Há?" After dinner on Monday night, Lisa, Sky and Alinga lay on the living room floor playing Uno. When they had finished their game, they started to talk about what they wanted to do for Ayyám-i-Há.
Let's have a party and invite all our friends, suggested Alinga.
Good idea, Ollie, said Lisa.
We can make special invitations with a Baha'i quote at the top. But no one will know what Ayyám-i-Há means, said Sky.
Yes, they will, from when we talked about it at school last year, and from your project and my morning talk in grade 5, said Lisa.
They won't remember, said Sky.
Okay, so on one side of the invitation, we can explain what it is and put a quote from the writings, and on the other side, write the invitation. When the children had decided what they wanted to do, and Flip and Romy had agreed, they got to work straight away on their invitations. Alinga got some coloured card, stickers, crayons and felt pens out of the art supplies cupboard. Sky went to find some scissors to cut the card. Somehow the scissors were always missing when they were needed. And Lisa took selections from the writings of Abdul-Baha down from the shelf in the living room to find a good quote. Lisa turned to love in the index. There seemed to be more than 100 references. While Ollie and Sky started preparing the cards, Lisa read through some of the passages that referred to love.
What about this one? She said finally,
and read one that she particularly liked. Everyone agreed that it was perfect for the invitation.
So, how many people are we inviting? Asked Sky,
cutting the coloured card into invitation-sized squares.
Let's see, said Lisa, grabbing a felt pen and a long scrap of coloured card.
The children wrote a list of the people they wanted to invite. Then they counted the number of names on the list. 34.
How are we going to write out 34 invitation cards? Moaned Lisa.
The children looked at each other, feeling tired just at the thought of it. Flip, resting on the couch, had been listening to the children's conversation. He turned to face the children at the living room table behind the couch. Silently, Flip made a funny and dramatic begging face and put his hands together like he was praying. Then he pointed to Romy and nodded his head, grinning. Straight away, the children understood what Flip was saying.
"Mom!"
the 3 children chorused. Without looking up from her book, Romy said, "Yes, Flip?" Then she closed her book with a snap and pretended to hit Flip over the head with it. She turned to face the children, resting her knees on the seat of the old brown couch and her elbows on the back of it. "What's up, Doc?" she said, smiling. "Hey, that's my line," complained Flip. "Get your own." "Flip Fitzgerald, pipe down," said Romy sternly. Flip looked at her in mock horror. Then he started looking at his pointer fingers as if they were no longer part of his own body. The fingers were wiggling up and down. "No," said Romy even more sternly, but to no avail. Soon Flip had launched a tickle attack on Romy. Romy was pushed off the couch and onto the floor and mercilessly tickled. Her demands that Flip get away from me right now, interspersed with hysterical laughter, were completely ignored. Soon reinforcements arrived at both sides. Sky jumped on Flip's back and tried to wrestle his tickling hands away, while Alinga tugged on Sky's legs, trying to drag her off Flip's back. Lisa tried to tickle Flip to make him weaker. Finally, Flip made a loud bell sound and stood up. He grabbed one of Alinga's arms and raised both his own arms in the air, saying, "Ladies and gentlemen, the new tickle champions of Fellowship Farm, Mr. Alinga Gayatri William Fitzgerald and his honourable father. Thank you, thank you, thank you very much." Romy's frizzy hair was sticking up all over the place as she straightened her clothes and pulled herself back up onto the couch. "Fellowship Farm Nutters, more like it," she muttered, smoothing her hair back down again.
When order was resumed, Romy turned to the children and said with exaggerated weariness, "Where were we?" The children explained their idea for the Ayyám-i-Há party invitations. They asked Romy if she could put the texts into her computer at the surgery and print them out. Then the children could just cut them up and stick them on the card instead of writing everything 34 times. Romy agreed. So the children set to work writing the text of their invitation and the quote from Abdul-Baha, clearly on a piece of paper for Romy to take to work the next day. Chapter 3: Invitations. As soon as Romy arrived home from work on Tuesday evening, the children rushed to find out if she had brought the texts for their invitations. Romy opened her vet bag and pulled out a plastic pocket with about 20 sheets of paper. Each piece of paper had 4 texts on it. "Yay!" said Sky, grabbing the plastic pocket and running from Romy's car into the house. "Hey, come back, Sky!" yelled Alinga. "They're not just yours! Sky! Sky!" He whined before giving up and racing after his sister. After dinner, the children worked hard, cutting neatly around the printed texts and sticking them on the cards. They wrote the names of one of their classmates on each one. On the corner of each card, they punched a hole and tied some orange plastic ribbon through the hole. Lisa used the scissors to make the ribbon curl in loose curls. When they had finished, they looked proudly at the fruits of their labor. 40 beautiful Ayyám-i-Há cards. 6 of the cards were not invitations. They just had information about Ayyám-i-Há on one side and the quote on the other side. Those cards were for their teachers and the teachers' assistants. "Good job, kids," said Flip as he walked past the table on his way to the kitchen. Lisa held up a card to admire it. On one side it read, "Dear Rowan, you are invited to a party." What? A celebration of Ayyám-i-Há. Where? Fellowship Farm. When? Saturday, 29 February at 10 a.m. Please bring your swimmers. Cleanse ye your eyes, so that ye behold no man as different from yourselves. See ye no strangers. Rather see all men as friends. For love and unity come hard when ye fix your gaze on otherness. Abdul-Baha. And on the other side, Ayyám-i-Há is a special time for Baha'is all over the world. Ayyám-i-Há means days of Ha. They are the days just before the Baha'i month of fasting. There are 4 of them and 5 in a leap year. Ayyám-i-Há is a time for spiritual preparation for the fast, hospitality, feasting, charity, and gift-giving. The children put their invitations into the plastic pocket that the texts had come in. They put them into Lisa's school bag, ready to give out at school the next day. They felt very excited. "Can we do a big barbecue lunch for the party, Mummy?" asked Lisa. Romy raised her eyebrows and looked at Flip. "Sure," said Flip. "If you're okay to pick up some sausages and the stuff tomorrow after work?" Romy nodded. "Yay! And Daddy, don't forget you promised to get the tarpaulin out of the shed for us so we can make the super glider slip and slider." "Right," said Flip, banging his forehead because he had forgotten. The super glider slip and slider was Flip's name for something the children loved to do when the weather was hot. They planned to set it up for the party. As the sun set, Ayyám-i-Há began. "Happy Ayyám-i-Há, everybody!" said Alinga, coming into the living room for prayers with freshly brushed teeth. After prayers, Alinga went off to bed. He was joined half an hour later by Sky. And at 8:30, Lisa put her homework into her school bag and joined her siblings. Before she got into bed, she opened the bedroom curtains so that the evening breeze could come in. She climbed up to her top bunk. It was too hot to get under the covers, so she just lay on top of her bed, thinking about the days ahead. Just then, she felt a poke through her mattress. "Hey, sister," said Sky. Lisa hung her head over the edge of the bunk to talk to Sky. "I thought you were asleep." "Nope, I'm too excited about tomorrow." "Yeah, me too," said Lisa. "Hey, if you wake up early, wake me up, okay?" "Okay." Lisa pulled her head back up onto her bed. "Good night," they both said at once. "Jinx on you," said Sky. Chapter 4: The Hunt Begins. When Lisa woke the next morning, neither the sun nor her parents were up. The clock said 5:32. As Lisa climbed down the bunk ladder, she whispered loudly, "Sky! Sky! Wake up!" Sky rolled over to face her sister. She looked at the clock. She lay for a few seconds rubbing her eyes and then slowly sat up. It was half an hour earlier than the time they usually got up. Sky's eyes didn't want to stay open. "Is Ollie awake?" she said. Alinga, like a little wombat, was curled up in a tight ball under his sheet. Only the top of his head was showing. He was still fast asleep. Lisa gently pushed his shoulder to and fro. "Ollie! Ollie! Wake up, wombat!" Alinga's face slowly appeared from under the sheet. He lay looking at his sisters, gradually waking up. Then he reached his arms up over his pillow and pushed his toes toward the end of his bed in a big stretch that changed him from a wombat to a snake. Alinga pushed his sheet down to the end of his bed using his legs and feet and sat up. "What's the time?" he yawned. 5:30, said Sky, climbing out of bed. Flip and Rummy were still asleep, so the children couldn't have prayers yet. They decided to get the breakfast things set up to save time after prayers. They padded out to the kitchen and turned on the light. Sky started setting out the cereal boxes, milk and spreads. Lisa cut up fruit and made toast. Alinga put cups, plates and bowls and cutlery around the table for each member of the family. Even though they really wanted Flip and Rummy to wake up so that they could start the day, they tried to be considerate and not make too much noise. While they worked, they talked in whispers and they shut cupboards and drawers carefully so as not to make a bang. Suddenly, the early morning quiet was broken by a loud crash. Alinga looked at his sisters with wide, frightened eyes. "Uh-oh!" moaned Sky, reaching for the small dustpan and broom to sweep up the broken ceramic of the bowl that had fallen out of Alinga's hand onto the kitchen floor. A few seconds later, Rummy appeared, pulling on her dressing gown as she crossed through the living room and squinting from the bright light as she came into the kitchen. The children waited anxiously for Rummy's response. Rummy, however, realizing that the sound had not come from a burglar breaking in and that no one was hurt, just turned around and went back to her bedroom. "The kids beat you up today, Flip," they heard her say. "You've slept in. It's nearly 6. After prayers and breakfast, the children hurried to attend to their chores. To save time, they divided the work amongst themselves. Lisa attended to the pigs, Sky fed the dogs, Alinga let the chickens out and fed the pigeons. Then they hurried back to the farmhouse to shower and get ready for school. Normally they were ready just in time for the school bus at 7:30. But today they were ready with bags packed, hair brushed and uniforms on at 6:45. The children were ready for the first Ayyám-i-Há treasure hunt. "Mum, we're ready!" Romy added hamburgers to the shopping list and looked up. "What for, my darlings?" she asked, but her eyes sparkled with humour. "For the Ayyám-i-Há treasure hunt, Mum!" Romy looked back down at the shopping list. "Oh, we're not having treasure hunts this year," she said casually and pretended to be very occupied with writing capsicum. "Come on, Mummy, or else we won't have time to finish it before the bus comes," said Sky. "Oh," said Romy vaguely. "No, I'm afraid we've decided not to do treasure hunts this year. We thought you're all much too big for those games, and you'd find them boring." "Mom!" "So, if you wouldn't mind," Romy continued, "could you get my reading glasses from the sunroom?" The children knew Romy didn't have any reading glasses. They rushed off to the sunroom for the first clue. On the piano was a piece of yellow paper folded over. They hurried to open it. Inside, they found a sentence in Romy's neat handwriting. Sky read aloud, "They are the waves of one sea, the drops of one river, the stars of one heaven, the rays of one sun, the trees of one... the flowers of one garden, Abdul-Baha." "The trees of one orchard!" yelled Lisa, and the treasure hunt began. Chapter 5. More Clues. The children charged through the house and out the kitchen door. In the boot room, they pulled on their school socks and pushed them into their blue leather school shoes. Then, shoving their feet into their gumboots, they stumbled down the veranda steps and rushed down the side of the house. The puppies thought it was a wonderful game and darted in and out of the children's legs, yapping excitedly and tripping them up. Once they reached the orchard at the top of the long hill paddock, they didn't have to look hard for the next clue. It was in a plastic pocket pinned to the gate. Alinga pulled it off and opened the note inside. His sisters looked eagerly over his shoulder and helped him as he read the words Flip had printed on clue number 2. "Sheep, cows, and... graze together in concord and agreement, but ferocious animals are never seen associating in love and fellowship. Abdul-Baha." Alinga didn't know the quote, but he could guess what the missing word was. His eyes were bright as he grabbed Sky's arm and yelled, "Horses! Horses! Horses graze together!" The children threw themselves over the gate of the orchard and hurried through the long, dry grass. At the end of the orchard was the horse paddock. The children checked the gates to the paddock but found nothing. The horses were standing at the bottom of the paddock. Lisa clicked her tongue and called out. The horses started to trot up the paddock, hoping for an apple or carrot or two. "Nothing for you today," she said as the horses snuffed their hands. "Actually, we were hoping you might have something for us." The children checked the horses' halters for hidden bits of paper. They checked their tails and their manes. Suddenly, Lisa cried out, "Found it!" Rolled up and attached to a chunk of mane by a rubber band was the third clue. Lisa pulled it off and slipped the rubber band over her wrist. She opened the tightly rolled paper and started to read. "If an animal be sick, let the children try to heal it. If it be, let them it. Abdul-Baha." "If an animal be sick, let the children try to heal it. If it be hungry, let them feed it," cried Sky. It was a passage they often sang during their daily prayers. However, the children weren't sure where to go next. There were lots of hungry animals on the farm that were fed each day. Did the clue mean the pigs, or the farm dogs, or the chickens, or the pigeons, or the puppies, or the cows? They decided to be systematic. They would start at the hay barn because that was the closest to the horse paddock, then work their way down to the fridge where they kept the farm dogs' bones, then the chickens and so on. They left the horses, still asking for their treat, and climbed over the gate. The puppies squeezed underneath and they all walked quickly toward the hay barn. There was not much time left before the bus would arrive and they would have to go to school. The barn was absolutely full of hay, so the clue couldn't be inside. They searched the outside walls and doors of the barn, but found nothing, so decided to move on to the farm dog's fridge. Sky had fed the farm dogs that morning and hadn't noticed any clues there, so she was pretty sure they wouldn't find the fourth clue at the fridge. But as it turned out, stuck to the side of the fridge near the shed wall was a piece of paper. Sky had not noticed it in the morning because she had come to the fridge from the other side. It was Sky's turn to read again, so she opened it up. As she did so, Lisa glanced up at the dusty old clock on the shed wall. It was 7:20 already. Sky read hastily. If an animal be sick, let the children try to... Abdul-Baha. It was the same passage as clue number 3, but a different part. Heal it! They cried at once and turned to run down the hill toward the farmhouse. Tossing their boots in a messy pile in the boot room, they hurried into the kitchen. Rommy's vet bag was sitting in the middle of the kitchen table. Usually she kept it in a cupboard high above the fridge, and the children were strictly prohibited from touching anything in it without an adult. Alinga grabbed the bag and lifted it up. Sure enough, underneath the bag was the 5th piece of yellow paper. Ollie opened it up, but it was a long quote, and in Rommy's running writing. You read it, Lisa, he said, thrusting the paper at Lisa. Taking the paper, Lisa read, The song we have just listened to was very beautiful in melody and words. The art of is divine and effective. It is the food of the soul and the spirit. Through the power and charm of the spirit of man is uplifted. Abdul-Baha. Music! Said Lisa and Sky together. They thought only for a few moments and then, the guitar! They said together again and laughed. Just then they heard the familiar sound of the old bus roaring up the road. Oh no! They groaned. Ms. Rowbottom, the school bus driver, was very impatient. If the children weren't ready to go immediately, she would just turn around and leave them. It was terribly frustrating to have to leave the treasure hunt unfinished, but they had no choice. Bye, Mum! They called out and hurried to the boot room to put on their shoes. Romy appeared at the living room window, waving and blowing kisses as they rushed past. The children waved back. As they reached the gate of the farm, Ms. Rowbottom was already turning the bus around. She pulled over on the other side of the road, just long enough for the 3 panting children to rush up the steps and onto the bus. Chapter 6, Bullies Strike. When the children arrived at school, Lisa gave Sky and Alinga the invitations for their friends. Alinga was inviting 10 friends. Sky and Lisa were inviting 12 each. And they each had 2 cards for their teachers. By the time the bell rang for the day to start, they had given out nearly all the invitations and left the cards on their teachers' tables. During the first class of the day, there were lots of notes being passed back and forth as the children discussed the party. At recess time, Sky and her friends gathered at the downball court. They were talking about the party, and Sky was answering questions about Ayyám-i-Há. A group of boys from grade 6 sauntered past. In squeaky, high-pitched voices, they imitated the girls. Ooh, Damien, A party! Ooh, I can't wait! We'll have fairy bread and all sorts of goodies.
The girls frowned at the boys and turned their backs on them, hoping they would go away. Suddenly, one of the boys reached out and grabbed the invitation that Zoe was holding. He started to read it in a loud, high-pitched voice, pausing between phrases and pursing his lips.
Dear Zoe, you are invited to a party. What a celebration of Ayyám-i-Há. Ayyám-i-Há. What's that?
The boy started to laugh, and speaking in his regular voice, he started to tease.
Ayyám-i-Há salami bar. Ayyám-i-Há ha 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 ha.
He flipped the card over and read the back.
Hey Dazza, check this out. We're celebrating the days of ha 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 ha, a time of gift giving. Oh, goody goody gumdrops, where's my gift then?
He smirked at Sky. Flipping the card back over, he read out loud,
Abdul-Baha? Abdul-Baha? What even is that? What a silly name.
Sky was starting to feel angry, but she stayed calm. Looking at the boy, she said,
It's not a silly name, and don't be so rude. Oh, getting upset, are you? What a crazy name. It doesn't even make sense.
Just ignore him, Sky, said Zoe, linking her arm through her friend's. Sky was furious. She said,
Don't say mean things about Abdul-Baha. He was the kindest man who ever lived.
The boys clutched their stomachs and doubled over in mocking laughter.
Come on, Sky,
said Zoe. The group of girls walked away from the downball court and went back inside. Inside the school building, they decided to go and report what had happened. They knocked on the staff room door. The new teacher's assistant for grade 3, Ms. Richards, came to the door. What is it, girls? She asked. Sky told the teacher her name and what had happened. When Sky had finished, the teacher nodded slowly and said, Okay, thank you, Sky Marie. I'll follow that up with their teacher. Soon the bell rang and the children returned to their classrooms. Sky felt shaken and struggled to focus on her work. During lunchtime, she went to play soccer as usual, but she didn't have her usual energy. After school, Lisa, Sky and Alinga met under the oak trees to wait for the school bus. Sky saw Ms. Richards come out of the grade 6 classroom and walk towards her. She was carrying the card that Lisa had given to her teacher that morning. How are you feeling now? She asked as she approached.
I'm fine,
said Sky, shrugging her shoulders. Ms. Richards stood and chatted for a few moments with Sky. She said that the boys were on Saturday morning detention for their bullying. That meant they would have to come into school on Saturday, pick up litter for an hour, and write an essay for 2 hours.
Oh, they should write an essay called The Earth is but one country and mankind its citizens,
said Sky, grinning. Ms. Richards looked surprised. She held up the card and pointed to the quote by Abdul-Baha. Actually, Sky Marie, I came to ask you where you got these words from. And now I'd like to know where you got those words from too, she asked, referring to Sky's suggested essay title.
They're from the Baha'i writings,
said Sky. Ms. Richards had not heard of the Baha'i faith. She asked Sky if there were any more Baha'i writings that she could have a look at.
I'll bring you a book tomorrow,
promised Sky. The doors of the bus had opened, and the children were already climbing in, so Sky said goodbye to Ms. Richards and joined Lisa and Alinga, who had saved her a seat. As the bus trundled through the town, Lisa, Sky and Alinga remembered their unfinished treasure hunt and reminded each other about where they were up to. Chapter 7, The Hunt Ends. Flip sat with the children while they ate their snack, reminding them to chew. Then he returned to work.
When they had finished their hurried snack, the children rushed off to change out of their uniforms. They thought it would be okay if they finished the treasure hunt first and then did their afternoon chores. So when they all changed, they went together to the guitar. Lisa opened the case carefully. On top of the guitar was a folded piece of yellow paper. She took it out and lowered the case lid. The clue read, "The world of humanity has two wings. One is women and the other men. Not until both wings are equally developed can the fly. Abdul-Baha." "Bird!" they all said. It could mean the chickens, or it could mean the pigeons, or even the ducks on the pond near the shearing shed. They decided to check the pigeons first, because they were the birds that really flew. The chickens and ducks mostly just flapped about a bit. The pigeon house was at the bottom of the back garden. They walked down the veranda steps, over the lawn, past the washing line, past the beautiful doghouse they had made for their puppies, down to the back fence. On the other side of the fence, the neighbour's property started. But on this side of the fence was a small house on stilts, full of pigeons. The children peered through the wire. Inside the cage, there were plenty of pigeons, feathers, droppings and seeds, but no pieces of yellow paper. They looked at the sides and back of the house, but found nothing. They decided to go to the chickens. As they were leaving the pigeon house, Alinga dropped down to scratch Flex's belly, who was rolling around on the grass near Alinga's feet. While he scratched, he glanced up at the pigeon house. "There it is!" he suddenly cried, pointing to the bottom of the pigeon house. Sure enough, pinned to the outside of the floor of the cage was a yellow piece of paper. Alinga crawled under and pulled it off. This piece of paper was different from the others. It had been sealed on all sides with sticky tape to make a kind of envelope. Alinga tore it open with some slobbery help from Flex. When they saw what was inside, the children knew they had come to the end of the treasure hunt for the first day of Ayyám-i-Há. There was no note, just a piece of dark green card. The children took the card up to the house and put it in the drawer of the table next to the living room couch. They would not understand this clue until they had the other 3 clues from the other treasure hunts. Then, putting the 4 clues together, they would know where to look for their gift. Oh, it was so hard to be patient. They wanted to do all the treasure hunts right away. Romy arrived home later than usual because she had been shopping. The children helped her carry in the bags full of food for their party on Saturday. While they were putting them in the big storage fridges in the boot room, Flip arrived home. He and Romy washed and changed their clothes. Together, they made a quick, simple but delicious dinner of omelette and toast. While the family ate, Skye told her parents about the bully and about Ms. Richards.
Perfect and different,"
said Flip, his mouth full of egg and toast.
"Pardon me, Daddy?"
giggled Skye. Flip swallowed and had a drink of water.
"Crisis and victory,"
he repeated. The history of the faith is full of crisis and victory. It means something difficult happens, like the bully being so mean to you today. And then, out of that difficulty, something good happens for the faith, like Ms. Richards hearing about the faith for the first time. Skye agreed. She asked for permission to take some writings for Ms. Richards tomorrow. Romy said she'd help her choose something from the Baha'i supplies cupboard. The day had started early and had been busy. Soon after dinner, the family sang prayers. Then Alinga took himself off to bed, followed by Skye. Lisa finished her homework, drawing her map of the world showing where the rainforests grew. Then she too joined her siblings and fell quickly into a deep sleep. Chapter 8, Once a Week. On the second day of Ayyám-i-Há, the children woke early once again. After prayers, Flip told the children to have their breakfast and get ready for school. He said that he would do the morning chores for them, so that they would have time for their treasure hunt. The children were very happy and went to sit up at the breakfast table.
"Thank you for your kindness, Daddy,"
said Alinga. Flip bent down and gave Alinga a scratchy face rub with his scratchy chin. When bags were packed, including a book for Miss Richards, hair and teeth were brushed and uniforms were on, the children went hunting for the first clue. Both Romy and Flip were out on the farm already, so they had to find it themselves. They looked all over the house but found nothing. As soon as they went out onto the veranda, however, the treasure hunt for day 2 began. On the veranda, there were 3 sticks in the form of an arrow. The sticks directed the children down the steps and across the lawn. The children followed the direction of the arrow, trying to walk as straightly as possible and not go off course. Near the bottom of the garden, they found another stick arrow pointing to the vegetable garden. The vegetable garden that had no vegetables. Amongst the clumps of soil and the dried-up weeds, there was another arrow. They turned right and walked the length of the veggie patch and out the gate. They found no new arrows, so they kept walking in a straight line across the track, going up to the shed and hay barn. They were walking down towards the pig pen. Before they reached the pig pen, however, they came across another arrow pointing up the hill toward the shed. Following the arrows, the children zigzagged up the hill and around the shed. They followed the arrows past the hay barn, through the horses' paddock, and into the orchard. At the foot of the tree where the children's treehouse was, there was an arrow drawn in chalk on the bark. It pointed upward. One after another, the children climbed up the ladder and into the treehouse. Inside the treehouse, a spider had built a big web in one corner. The children tried to avoid it as they looked around the treehouse for the next arrow. They didn't find an arrow, but underneath one of the cushions on the floor of the treehouse, Sky found another homemade yellow envelope. The children sat on the floor of the treehouse, huddled together around the clue for day 2. Inside the envelope was a piece of paper. On the paper were written the words, "Once a week." So the 2 clues so far were a green piece of card and once a week. The children thought hard as they climbed down from the treehouse and walked back down the hill paddock toward the farmhouse. But no one had any idea what the clues might mean. Back at the farmhouse, they slipped the second clue into the drawer with the first one and went outside to wait for the school bus, which arrived only a few minutes later. When the children arrived home from school that afternoon, they saw the sparks of the welder up at the big shed and waved up to Flip as they went into the house to have their snack. In the middle of the table was a big plate of cut-up fruit and cheese sticks. There was an empty plate for each of the children to put their food on. They each filled their plate with fruit and cheese and began to munch. Alinga finished first. He picked up his plate to take it to the sink. "What's that?" said Lisa, pointing to where Alinga's plate had been. There was a note. It said, "2. Busy days, we thought it might be best to do the 3rd. "What does that mean?" said Sky, puzzled. She picked up her own plate and took it to the sink. "Look," said Lisa. Underneath Sky's plate, there was another note. 4. Pop me. "Pop me?" said Sky. Lisa lifted up her plate. There was another note. 3. Ayyám-i-Há treasure hunt this afternoon. None of it made any sense. Alinga lifted the plate in the middle of the table that had the cut-up fruit and cheese sticks on it. Underneath that plate, they found a fourth note. 1. As tomorrow and Saturday are going to be... What could these funny notes mean? Just then, Sky noticed that each note had a number. She shifted the notes around on the table so that the numbers were in order. Then things became a little clearer. Together, the notes read, As tomorrow and Saturday are going to be busy days, we thought it might be best to do the third Ayyám-i-Há treasure hunt this afternoon. Pop me. Chapter 9. Pop me. Wee-hoo! Shrieked Alinga. 2 treasure hunts in one day! The meaning of the first 3 notes was clear, and it made the children very excited. But the 4th note was still a mystery. The children decided to think about it while they got changed out of their school uniforms. When she had changed, Sky went across the hall into the big bathroom. Lisa needed to use the toilet too, so she went further down the hall to the extra toilet. As Lisa came out of the toilet, she yelled, Pop me! Alinga and Sky came running. Lisa pointed to a sign attached to the closed sunroom door. The sunroom door was always kept open. There must be something in the sunroom. Curiously, the children slowly opened the door. Their eyes were met by a rainbow of color. The room was full of balloons. As they opened the door, some of the balloons escaped into the hallway. Pop me! Cried Sky, looking at the beautiful sea of gently shifting colored balls. Why do we have to pop them? As the children began to play, batting the balloons up to the ceiling, they realized that there was something inside each one. Sky grabbed a pink balloon and, blocking her ears, sat down hard on it. The balloon squeaked and then popped. Sky fell to the ground. Amongst bits of broken pink rubber, Sky found a piece of paper. Alinga and Lisa came closer to see what it said. On one side was the number 10. On the other side was the letter H. Lifting some of the other balloons and holding them up to the light, the children noticed that inside each balloon was a little piece of paper, just like the one from Sky's balloon. Sky grabbed another one and plunked herself down on it. Squeak! Bang! Ow! 29. Why? Soon the room was full of the sound of squeaking, stretching, and popping balloons. The children sat, stamped, and pinched the balloons to pop. Lisa found the best way was to press the balloon against the hook on the wall that had no picture hanging on it. Each time they popped a balloon, another piece of paper fell to the ground. They made a pile of papers on the piano stool. Finally, all that was left was a higgledy-piggledy mat of coloured rubber on the sunroom floor and a big pile of papers on the piano stool. Alinga grabbed the rubbish bin from behind the sunroom door and they quickly threw the bits of broken balloon into it. It filled the little basket completely. Then they turned to the pile of papers on the stool. Each one had a letter and a number. What should we do with all these bits of paper? Asked Sky, puzzled, scooping them up and dropping them onto the floor. The children sat around the pile, not sure what to do next. Then Lisa started sifting through the papers. What are you doing, sister? Asked Alinga. I'm looking for number 1, she said. Sky and Alinga started looking too. Here it is, said Sky after a few moments, and passed it to Lisa. Now let's look for number 2, said Lisa. The children hunted through the pieces of paper, finding each number.
As they found them, Lisa made a line of them on the floor behind herself. When they got to 35, they were surprised that there was no letter on the back, just a dash, and 37 was the same. Finally, there were no more pieces of paper left in the pile. Behind Lisa, and stretching down past the couch towards the front window of the sunroom, was a line made up of 52 little squares of paper, all in order.
Now what?
Said Alinga. Now we turn them over, said Lisa. One by one, the children turned the numbers over. They stood back to see if anything made sense. They saw,
Dear Lisa, Sky and Alinga, happy Ayyám-i-Há, love Mum and Dad.
Lisa kneeled down and started pushing some letters up and some down, separating the words. When she had finished, Sky read,
Dear Lisa, Sky and Alinga, happy Ayyám-i-Há, love Mum and Dad.
So this was the third clue. What a strange clue it was. An Ayyám-i-Há greeting from their parents? The children gathered the little pieces of paper, making sure to keep them in order as they made a pile. They took them out to the kitchen where Lisa wrapped them in a rubber band and gave them to Alinga to put with the other clues.
So we have 3 clues now,
said Sky thoughtfully, pulling at her thumbnail with her teeth.
A piece of green card, once a week, and now this note from Mum and Dad. What can they mean?
Chapter 10, Setting Up the Super Glider Slip and Slider. Saturday morning dawned bright and sunny. The Fitzgerald family was very busy. Flip had cleaned the tarpaulin and draped it over the fence of the hill paddock. Now the children took it up to the steepest part of the hill, and with Flip's help, they hammered some metal rods with hooks on top through the metal-rimmed holes in the corners of the tarp. They hammered them right down to the ground so that no one would get hurt as they played on the super glider slip and slider. When the tarp was in place, they placed one end of a fat piece of hose in the stream, up the hill from the tarp. They made sure it was firmly in place between 2 rocks, and then let it down and across the grass of the paddock to the tarp, so that a constant flow of water trickled down over the shiny blue fabric. Sky ran back to the farmhouse and put a layer of dishwashing liquid in the bottom of a bucket with some sponges. She brought it up the hill to where the tarp had been secured and left it there. The next thing to prepare was the barbecue. Romy helped the children bring the long metal box from the shed down to the back lawn of the farmhouse. They would make the fire in the bottom of the box. Lisa and Sky used soapy water and a hose to wash the big metal grid that they would put over the top to cook the meat. Alinga shifted the little wooden table from the veranda down to near the barbecue, and then went hunting for old newspaper, kindling and matches. The old folding card table with the wobbly legs was brought out from the boot room, dusted off and covered with a plastic tablecloth. Sky and Alinga shifted it down to the barbecue. That was the table where the raw meat would be kept when they started cooking. The kitchen table was moved out onto the veranda and covered in a big cloth. Flip and Lisa set up paper plates, napkins, cups, forks, spoons, big jugs of water, tomato sauce and salt and pepper. Because the kitchen table had been shifted onto the veranda, the salads and other extras had to be prepared on the dining table in the living room. Sky set herself up with a packet of butter and a big pile of whole grain rolls. She carefully cut the rolls open and buttered them one at a time, filling 2 big cloth-lined baskets with fresh buttered buns. Meanwhile, Lisa stood at the sink washing lettuce, tomato, carrots and other fresh vegetables. Alinga helped pat them dry with a clean tea towel and carry them in to the dining table.
Romy peeled, sliced and chopped cucumbers, tomatoes, lettuce and other salad vegetables. Flip grated dozens of carrots and mountains of cheese. When Sky had finished the bread rolls, she opened jars of olives and added them to the salads. 2 big tubs of ice cream were in the boot room freezer. Vanilla, chocolate and strawberry flavored. A big box of cones was tucked away in the kitchen cupboard. When the food had been prepared, the family took the big Ayyám-i-Há sign that they had made and tied it to the front gate of the farm with some colourful balloons. In brightly coloured letters, the sign said, "Welcome to the Fellowship Farm Ayyám-i-Há party." It was nearly time for the guests to start arriving. The children could hardly wait. They hurried inside to their bedroom where they took off their dirty farm clothes, which were covered in soapy water, dust turned to mud, and grime from the barbecue. Then they pulled on their swimmers and clean shorts and t-shirts. Sky clipped back her frizz and Romy ran a brush through Alinga's fine, constantly knotty hair. She then pulled Lisa's long dark hair back into a single plait and tied a red bow at the end. The Fitzgerald family was ready for the Ayyám-i-Há party. All they needed were the guests. Just then, they heard the sound of a car driving past the farmhouse and slowing to turn in at the gate. The children ran outside to greet their guests. Chapter 11, The Ayyám-i-Há Party. Carload after carload of children arrived, bringing Lisa, Sky's and Alinga's friends. Some of the older children were accompanied by younger siblings, and some of the parents stayed on for the party. Soon the back lawn was full of children and puppies chasing each other, laughing and playing noisily. When all the expected guests had arrived, Lisa announced it was time for the Super Glider Slip and Slider. Soon, all that was left of the big group of children on the back lawn was a big pile of discarded clothes. Romy led the way. None of the children were allowed to walk ahead of her. Most of the guests had come in their good shoes, which now lay with the piles of clothes on the lawn. So in order to protect all bare little feet from possible snakes, Romy went ahead in gumboots. She stomped out through the gate to the hill paddock and up the hill, and encouraged the children to make lots of noise and stomp as well. They needed little encouragement. When Lisa and Sky arrived at the tarpaulin, they dribbled the hose into the bucket. Then, with wet, soapy sponges, they wiped the tarp all over until it became one enormous, wet, soapy, slippery dip. The children lined up at the top of the tarp, and when the girls finished preparing the Super Glider Slip and Slider, the first of the guests threw themselves onto the tarp, squealing with delight as they whizzed down and skidded to a slow stop on the soggy grass at the end. In order to avoid anyone being hurt, Romy and Flip tried to keep some kind of order. But the excited children were not very interested in order, and soon the children were skidding down 6 or 7 at a time, on bottoms, tummies, backs and knees, front first, head first, bottom first. There were a few inevitable bumps and bruises, but the main product of the 2 hours of super gliding slip and sliding was squeals of delight, endless giggling, and a gaggle of bright-eyed, panting, wet and soapy children. Halfway through, Flip left Romy and 2 of the other parents to supervise the hilarity, and went to start the barbecue. Soon the delicious smells of barbecuing sausages, veggie burgers and hamburgers came wafting up the hill. Romy told everyone to have one last turn. And so, one by one, the children had their last turn, followed by their very last turn, and just one more very last turn. Until finally Romy pulled up the stakes that were holding the tarp and folded it over on itself. The children trooped noisily down the hill, stopping at the low bridge over the creek to wash the soap off their bodies. By the time they arrived back at the farmhouse, the table on the veranda was covered in bowls of salad, baskets of bread rolls, and big plates of barbecued sausages and burgers. Some of the parents who had remained behind with the very young children had roughly folded the discarded clothes and moved them to the far end of the veranda. But none of the super glider slip and sliders were the least bit interested in getting dressed. There were far more important things to do. With plates loaded with food, the children found places to sit on the lawn and were promptly attacked by hungry puppies. Flip left the barbecue and ran over to grab the puppies. He tied them to their little house so they could still see what was going on, but couldn't steal anyone's food. They were very cross indeed and yelped and howled to be let free. Flip threw them each a hot sausage, and they became occupied with the difficult problem of eating the sausage in a rush without getting burnt. Lisa, Sky, and Alinga attended to their guests, making sure everyone had everything they needed. They wandered around, filling up glasses with water and checking that there were enough sausages, burgers, bread rolls, and salad for all the guests. As the guests finished, the Fitzgerald children walked around with a big garbage bag and an old ice cream container. The plates and napkins went into the bag, and the scraps went into the ice cream container. Flea, Flex, and Fizz were the happy recipients of the scraps. Romy brought the ice cream out of the freezer and the cones out of the kitchen cupboard. Lisa, Sky, and Alinga helped scoop out the ice cream into the cones and hand them out to the eagerly awaiting children. When everyone, including the chief barbecuer, had been given an ice cream, Alinga and his sisters helped themselves to an ice cream cone and then put the little bit of ice cream that was left back in the freezer. With full tummies and sticky fingers, the children rinsed off at the tap on the side of the house and started to play. It wasn't long, however, before the first cars started coming up the road and into the gate of Fellowship Farm to collect the guests. Gradually, the guests started to leave. As they left, they thanked the Fitzgeralds for a wonderful party and wished them a happy Ayyám-i-Há.
I can't wait till next Ayyám-i-Há,
said Zoe to her mother as she climbed into the car. Chapter 12, The Ayyám-i-Há Present. Sunday was the 5th day of Ayyám-i-Há, the day of the 4th and final treasure hunt. The day they would be able to sit with all 4 pieces of the puzzle and be able to work out what they meant. However, the children were tired after the preparation, the party, and the cleaning up from the day before. The sun had already risen high when they woke up and had their morning prayers. As they finished off their morning chores, they began to wonder where the first clue might be. By the time the children had finished feeding the puppies, Romy and Flip had also finished their morning chores and were sitting on the veranda reading the newspapers. The children knew it would be pointless to just ask their parents where they might find the first clue of the treasure hunt. They sat themselves quietly down on the steps of the veranda. Romy and Flip pretended to ignore them. Just then, Lisa had an idea. She beckoned her brother and sister to come close. She whispered her idea to them, and they agreed it might work. They sat back on the steps of the veranda. Just then, Lisa started to sing. First, she sang the Ayyám-i-Há song. Then she sang other Baha'i songs. When she had run out, she started singing anything she could think of, including Baba Black Sheep. She sang loudly and without seeming to pause for breath. Flip and Romy looked at her over the top of their papers and continued reading. Soon, Sky started to sing too. She also sang loudly, but she made sure she was never singing the same song as Lisa at the same time. It sounded very unpleasant. Romy and Flip shifted in their chairs and turned the page of their papers and continued to read. Finally, Alinga joined in. He sang Jingle Bells at the top of his voice, followed by a number of silly, noisy songs. The three of them continued to sing as loudly as they could, each of them singing a different song from the other, until finally Romy yelled, "The crows are loud this morning, Flip. How about we go inside?"
Good idea, Rom,
said Flip, standing up. He straightened his paper and gave it a hard shake. Out of his newspaper fell a piece of paper. "It worked! It worked!" shrieked Lisa, pouncing on the piece of paper. The singing stopped and Flip sat down to continue reading the paper. The children took the piece of paper to the bottom of the veranda steps and opened it up. Inside there was a silly rhyme. "Pork and bacon, chops and ham, let's go swimming in the..." The children raced off on the fourth and final treasure hunt. At the dam, they found twigs and wigs and figs and jigs, make a visit to the... The next note led them from the pigsty to the farmhouse. Through the gate and up the path, not the shower, but the... In the bottom of the tub, they found blue and green and pink and red. After prayers, it's time for... Lisa found the yellow envelope first. It was on the top bunk, under Lisa's pillow. She pulled it down and they all sat on Alinga's bed to open it. The envelope felt almost empty. But inside, there was one small square of paper. Alinga pulled it out and held it up for everyone to see. "A stamp!" said Lisa. The children took the fourth clue out to the living room. Sky got the other three clues from the drawer, and they put them all together on the floor. A green card, once a week, a letter from their parents, a stamp. "What do they mean?" asked Lisa. But nobody knew. "A stamp and letter go together," Sky observed. You're right, Sky," said Lisa. "And our letters come once a week," added Sky, starting to get a little bit excited. "Right! The mail comes to Fellowship Farm once a week. And it goes into the mailbox, which is green," shouted Alinga, suddenly solving the last piece of the puzzle. "Yes, yes!" said Lisa and Sky as they all hurried up off the floor. "The mailbox!" they yelled at once and ran off to see what might be inside. Grabbing the wooden door of the mailbox, the children nearly yanked it off in their hurry. Inside was a letter. The printing on the envelope was from a computer. Lisa knew someone who always wrote everything on a computer. Could it be from him? It was addressed to Ms. Lisa Fitzgerald, Ms. Sky Marie Fitzgerald, Mr. Alinga Fitzgerald, Fellowship Farm, Choppy's Point Road, Kellyton, Tasmania. Lisa opened the envelope carefully. As she pulled the piece of paper out of the envelope, 9 tickets fell out. 6 of them were real. 3 of them had been hand-drawn. The pretend ones had a picture of a bus on each one. Lisa picked up the tickets, unfolded the letter and read, "Most Honourable Nieces and Most Distinguished Nephew. It's from Uncle Jack! I knew it! We trust that this letter finds you in the utmost health, both physically and, more importantly, spiritually. We write to invite you, most cordially, to visit the estate of one Sir Uncle Jack. Your presence is requested upon the weekend immediately following that of the days of Ha. Should it be agreeable to you, during that period we shall accompany you on a royal tour of the esteemed K.A.D. Chocolate Factory and the renowned Sarah King Aquatic Centre before returning you to your place of origin on the coach of the Blue Circles. We await your reply. Sincerely, Uncle Jack, you Jack.
Wee-hoo! cried Lisa.
Wait, Lisa, I don't get it. What does it mean?
Alinga's voice started to turn to a whine.
It means, little brother, said Lisa, looking back at the letter. Dear Lisa, Sky and Alinga, how are you? Please come to visit me next weekend and we will go to the chocolate factory and the swim centre. Then I will send you home on the bus. Love, Uncle Jack.
Wee-hoo! cried Alinga.
It was the best Ayyám-i-Há present in the world. It was going to be so much fun.
But that is another story.